And wow, how timely is this, especially after the week we've had? Spirituality and social justice is our topic. Reverend Terry Moe, I don't want to introduce you because I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself here in a moment, but I am going to ask you to come on up. And I want to point out, while you're on your way up, you have a copy of your book right here, and so does our music director, Nikki Farley.
Yeah.
So at least two of us have some idea of who you are. Yeah.
Turn this on, right?
You got to turn it on, yeah. And while you're doing that, I am getting my cell phone out, and I am going to put a timer on for 30 minutes.
Yeah, I do need a timer.
You're not the only one. Most of these, so far all of these, have gone past the timer.
Oh,
But that's, it's advisory. We'll wrap it up. We'll try to anyway. And the church is usually pretty good about wrapping up any other final comments we may have. Although, don't be surprised if you get mobbed while you're getting coffee and cookies.
Okay.
Sometimes, a good conversation just has to pour out. So you are Reverend Terry Moe, and I have known of you for, I would say, at least 12 or 13 years. Because of some of our mutual colleagues. You've been an advisory voice for many of them. But I hadn't met you until I started pastoring here. Because we go to the same coffee shop, Jet Black Coffee, now.
yes.
And I didn't know for like the first couple of years who you were. You were just this other person in the coffee shop. So that's how I know you. How would you like the rest of us to know you? How would you like to introduce yourself to us?
So I'll say a little bit. I'm a working class person and a third generation really immigrant. My grandparents spoke Norwegian in their family, and my parents grew up there in Minnesota, migrated out here. I was born in Prineville. So I'm a thorough Oregonian, which I'll say a little bit more about later for one of the questions. I retired from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Northeast Portland in 2013 after going through a process of transformation, which is the subject of the book. And since then, I've been doing spiritual accompaniment, mainly for organizers and leaders who want to be organizers, and that's one-to-one conversations, basically. Now I'm retired, and I have a rich family. My grandchildren live with me, and I have a great-grandson named Ezekiel who was born in August. And so I'm very, very happy to have them live with me after my wife died a year and a half ago. So maybe that's enough for now. I want to say a little bit more about, my vocation now, that I'm not an active pastor. I'm a member of Resurrection Lutheran up the street, which is a partner congregation, but I'm not the pastor there. So.
Thank you. So I was going to ask you what's your connection to the area, but you've kind of already spoken to it.
Yeah. So I was at Redeemer for 32 years, 5 months, and 17 days.
Wow.
Not that I was counting, but so
Yeah.
a long time. And I grew up in Eugene, so Oregon has been sort of
And what is Redeemer called now?
Oh yes, Leaven, Salt, and Light. So two kind of entities, a larger spiritual, not religious part for the social side, and then congregation, a Lutheran congregation, Salt and Light, together in one building and one entity.
Yeah. Thank you. Who here has heard of Leaven in any way, shape, or form? Okay, so Some of us have worked with Levin Land and Housing Coalition or Levin anti-racism efforts. There's other things they also are very active in doing. Them and Emerge were the first group I ever heard say that, you know, we're here for people of faith and fierce love. Like, yeah, we have folks who want to join in the efforts we do, who have no interest in Bible stuff, no interest in necessarily like a shared spirituality as they might articulate it, but they care.
Yes, totally.
They bring so much to it, and I think also fan the flames of that fierce love for the rest of us too. So
Yes.
Salt and Light Lutheran, I visited back when I was trying to figure out, like, what group do I want to be a part of when I was deconstructing, and I met with Melissa Reed.
Yes.
I think Melissa would say that she has considered you an advisory voice in her life, and she was the pastor of Salt and Light Lutheran Church at the time. I was so grateful that she made the space for me. She actually shared, she rebuked me early on in our conversation. We were going for a walk around the neighborhood, and I've shared that rebuke in a few sermons, including my first sermon here. So I said, you know, is it even wise for me to go into pastoral ministry when churches are dying? And she said, well, of course churches are dying. That's what churches do. They're always dying.
That sounds like her.
Yeah, we're always dying, and we're always being reborn. That's our story. The question is, what are we being reborn as? And boy, is that appropriate today.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. So my first message here, I was like, yeah, church, we're dying, and we're being reborn. And I still got to pastor here, which is awesome.
Yeah, and not only churches die, but people die. And, you know, I just had health concerns this week. I'm 75, and I'm aware that I'm going to die sometime. And that's given me a little bit of a jolt, really, to, okay, focus, slow down, but also engage.
Yeah.
So,
So you mentioned your vocation, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that a bit more. It might be helpful to even say, like, what on earth do you mean by the term vocation?
Yeah, I mean, a sense of calling, and I haven't been a Lutheran all my life, but I discovered that on my father's side, we were Lutherans back in the old country. So, and my dad was baptized Lutheran, and my great-grandfather helped build a Lutheran church in northern Minnesota. But I didn't know that. Something about Lutherans is they're kind of quiet sometimes, and they're kind of shy about sharing things. So, you know, I didn't know a lot about my family ancestrally or about my church connection. So it was great to have that connected. So, you know, I think I felt a call to be spiritual way before I was baptized. I wasn't baptized till I was 12 and joined the Lutheran church, and then, you know, looking back, I think, oh, you know, I was being invited by nature and by spirit to participate in something larger than myself, and I didn't know what it was. And so that's an unfolding story, right? It's I went to a church camp when I was 10 or 11, and gave my life to Jesus, and came back from that experience really tormented, and I was, you know, really sullen and crying in the car on the way back, and I ran into my mother's arms, and I said, I can't do it, I can't do it, I just can't do it. And she said, what can't you do? And I said, I can't give my life to Jesus in just one day. And that's really been a journey of, okay, what does that mean? So not just vocation once or calling once, but over and over again. And so that's a pretty germinal story for me. So.
Thank you. So you do a lot of work with organizers. And I think it might also be helpful for our conversation to parse out also what that means. Who's an organizer and what is organizing? You know, surely we mean something besides like sorting out what's in the cupboard, you know, or
Yeah.
making sure everything's filed alphabetically.
I'm not that kind of organizer.
Okay.
So just look at my desk. But, well, I mean, there's a definition I heard is that organizers unearth people's stories and connect people around their stories and move them to act on their own interests collectively. That's kind of a sociological definition. I like to think of it as reflectively thinking about the way the world works collectively, and then going upstream to see the sources and the pressures that are causing people to act in certain ways and to suffer as a result, and then trying to do something about the upstream causes of what people are experiencing. Not to say that, you know, helping people, you know, downstream or service are not important, but trying to act on the root causes collectively.
Yeah. A lot of people who have partnered with us for social justice work, they wear an official title of organizer, but I think everyone in this room, if they've shown up in care for another person, and if they've, just by the act of partnering with another for like a collective benefit, that's organizing.
Yeah, I mean, your reference to the Gresham City Council last Tuesday, whenever it was, and, you know, collecting people who have interests that are not being met, and then organizing in such a way to get people in power to do what they should be doing.
Yeah. Now this is work that I thought when I was early in my deconstruction and also early in showing up for justice causes, that I expected kind of immediate turnaround in.
Yes.
You know, in my evangelical conservative world I was in, I carried a fair degree of privilege that I hadn't even really examined up until that point.
Yes.
But, you know, I could say something and things could happen in that setting. And I found myself frustrated. Like, well, okay, we're saying stuff. How come stuff's not changing? You know, show up to a few protests and, all right, well, I've done my job. I'm at the protest. How come the thing is still happening? You know, Black Lives Matters had an organizer who was at PSU at the time a few years ago. And she said that this is not one and done work, this is generational work.
Yes.
And she was 21, and she said, the work I do now, I don't expect to make a difference in my life. I expect it to make a difference, and I hope it makes a difference in my grandchild's life. And I sat there despondent. What? That's a long time. How long am I going to have to do this? And it's a long time to care. It's a long time to care about people. It's a long time to care about, you know, the injustice happening around us. So in the conversation you and I were having, we were talking about like this work of social justice carries risk in it. It carries dangers in it. And it's not just dangers from other people, but there's some internal dangers too. And I was kind of hoping you could speak to that as well, because I think it intersects with our concern for spirituality.
Yeah, so on the time thing and the generational thing, you know, I started kind of late in this work. So I had a kind of a second calling. I was at Redeemer for about 10 years when the first organizer knocked on my door, and I'd really only heard of organizing. I didn't really know what it was. And so it took me a year to kind of get engaged and the congregation on board. And so I was about 40 when that happened. So I'm glad that there's 21-year-olds who are wrestling with that. I'm 75 now, so I've got a perspective. I've got experience. I kind of know what's happened in my own life, and I'm reflecting on that, which I think is really important. So, and then that quote that was read earlier from Teilhard de Chardin about trusting the slow work of God means a lot to me, because like you, I expected, things to turn around, and there have been some things that did, that, moved, but it is very slow. And I would say not just generational, but sort of like each iteration, people have to be engaged in it. Then the question about the dangers of that are, well, clearly burnout, that, without support, that's why I link spirituality and organizing, but clearly burnout, and I think there can be a stridency that comes with a self-righteousness that comes with sort of seeing the world as it ought to be, and kind of knowing better than other people, and maybe that's an important edge to have, but it can also get in the way. So I think people can lose themselves. They can lose themselves in a cause and lose their wholeness, their family life, their whole being. So that's a danger. And again, people have to dedicate themselves to, the causes too. So, one of the complaints my wife had, my dear wife, was, you spend a whole lot of time doing that and less time, with us and the family, right? And she really hated it when the organizer would call me during dinner and I would take the call. So, and talk, and it was a time he knew that I would be there, and I felt like I needed to pay attention to it. And I don't regret it necessarily now, but I see, that it was, a bit much. I could have handled myself differently. Yeah. Those are a few of the dangers. What do you think? I mean, you've had experience, so. Yeah.
Oh, boy. The self-righteousness piece that you brought up, it does speak to me, because it is so easy to hold all of these other folks to this standard that we think we're holding until somebody points out an area of incongruence, and when you're self-righteous and you also have somebody pointing out an area of incongruence, it's easy to deflect, to blame, or to get into this justification, this posture of like, well, don't you know how much I've done for X, Y, Z? Yeah, well, what I know is you were a jerk to me yesterday. Well, don't you know that I was totally justified in being a jerk to you? So there's that. There's also this perfectionism, I think, that sometimes with it comes
high
with
expectations and
Yeah.
ideals.
And a fear of imperfection. And I see this a lot on social media, where if we have people who are evaluating the work and the positions that we take, and they ought to.
Yes.
But without relationship, a lot of our comments just kind of fall on ears that can't receive.
Right.
And it could be easy to say, like, all right, so you're pushing for this one regulation to take place on this bill, but there's 50 other things we also need to have happen. So how come this bill doesn't include those 50 other things?
Yes.
We're like, but we're trying to push for the one right now. Tomorrow we could push for the other things, but today we got to push for the one. It's valid to bring it up, and it's valid to seek understanding in that. And also sometimes we cut ourselves up, and we cut each other up.
Yes.
Because of incremental efforts.
Yeah, the judgment that we have of others or the way the world is gets turned on ourselves and others in our community. I mean, that's a danger, I think, a real danger.
Yeah.
How come you're not as enlightened as I am, or, as active as I am? And,
yeah.
So I was thinking of a story, though, early on. We were doing housing action before. There were two urban renewal districts in Portland, the River District, which became the Pearl, and the South Waterfront. And the primary developer was Homer Williams. And I had a lot of stereotypes about developers, and about, their greed and all of that. But our organizer organized a meeting, with 50 leaders, and he was there, and just a conversation with him. And one of the questions they asked is, why do you do what you're doing? And I thought, and I think many in the room thought, he was going to say, because I needed to make a lot of money. And he did make a lot of money, but he was the kind of person who was easy come, easy go, so he had to keep working. But what he said was, I like to be able to design a community for people to live together. And I thought, well, that's kind of a common interest, and maybe the Pearl didn't turn out exactly the way I would organize that, but at least he was kind of an organizer, basically, of community in both places, and had his frustrations, of course, with the economy tanking in 2007. It was very difficult to fulfill those visions for either place. And he was amenable to our approach around, affordable housing, especially within the River District, less so in the South Waterfront. But having a relationship, I'd never thought about having a relationship with a developer instead of just ranting against what the developer was doing.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe that's another danger too, the siloing.
Siloing, yeah.
And isolating. So much of the work that we deeply desire to be done here will not happen if we aren't trying to build bridges.
Yes.
And find that common interest.
Yes.
We're seeing now, what, 3 years later, that some of the folks who were opposed to the We Shine Village for the last couple of years have been great advocates for it. And that's not, I won't say that's to all of our credit, because so much of certainly not my credit, because much of it happens before I got here. But it's to some of our credit who kept those doors open, right? Who kept those lines of communication open, and especially We Shine, who kept reaching out and saying, come over to the barbecue. We want to talk to you. We want to hear what you guys have to say.
Yes.
When Pastor Diane shared with me what had happened here, I bristled up, and I was like, they called the news media and they protested against us, and it would have been so easy to have an us and them.
Yes.
And I was shocked for us to have this barbecue and to meet the neighborhood watch person and to hear what their concerns are, but also how they've shifted. And it reminds me, people change. People can change. What a gift it is when we allow ourselves and others to change.
Yeah, and it reminds me of, another way to think about organizing, or a description of organizing that's stuck with me, 3 words: relational, reflective, and action-oriented. So the relationships are important in the community. So the community organizing isn't necessarily just out there, but it's inside. It's our relationships with each other, and then expanding those relationships to people who might differ in their opinions, So, but the example of Homer Williams is an example of building a relationship with a person of power and, kind of entering into his world a little bit too.
Yeah.
And then reflection is so important, and that's a piece I feel is really missing, and that goes to, my calling to what I'm doing now. So.
Well, that's a great segue. Let's talk about some of what you do now, because I think there's implications for us. We talked about how exhausting it can be to care, to keep showing up, and however we show up. And much of what you do happens to be that internal work that helps keep us going, if possible, if our circumstances allow us to. So let's talk about that work. What does your work with organizers and others involved in social justice look like? What do you do?
So I'm a trained spiritual director, but I don't like that term. So I like accompaniment or companion. So I accompany people who want to be accompanied, and there's a little contract. I say, I'm going to pray for you, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to listen, I'm going to offer my wisdom, and I want you to be able to enter into a period of reflection on your own life and bring that to me in writing so that we can talk about it. And most of them do, half of them do writing, and half of them reflect off the top of their heads, which isn't quite as good. I mean, I really value writing for getting clarity. So I meet with people once or twice a month, some on Zoom because they're out of state, and some locally in person, so as much in person as I can, for an hour, just like a spiritual direction or a therapy session, but it's not that. It's more coming alongside their experience and listening to what they're struggling with as they're organizing. And so there's that side, the organizing side, which is the external work that they're doing. Some of these are pastors, but some of these are lay people, organizers in my network, and some are kind of freestyle. And then the spirituality is something that not everybody has a a faith community to support them. It's those spiritual non-religious people that are doing the good work, and sometimes better work than many people from the faith community, that also have a kind of spirituality that could be nurtured. So I've been gentle, not trying to make everybody Lutherans or to believe what I believe, but to listen to what their needs might be. And so, Teilhard de Chardin talks about the within and the without, and the within, that everything without comes from a within. And that's a way to think about spirituality. So what's inside me, what's inside our community that is good and needs nurture, and then how does it get out?
So what are some practices that we can do? Maybe practices that help you, or you've seen have helped other folks? And keep in mind, like, a lot of us can't afford spiritual direction. A lot of us can't afford therapy. So we certainly can't afford spiritual direction. But we would appreciate knowing what could we access? Like, what have you found helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think having a companion, and I decided since I was on my pension and that I didn't need to charge, that I don't charge, but I don't charge a fee, but I do charge a set of practices, and the writing is at the top of that because, sort of just thinking about things is one thing, but sitting down and writing about your experience, your feelings, laying out what was happening and why it was happening, and the writing is just really important. And then sharing it with another person, and you could do that in groups. I mean, you could do that in small groups. So there's those, and then all the self-care practices that are necessary, eating well, exercise, socializing, having a life, getting a life, nurturing your life. So
How do you see those things intersecting? Because even though I've tried to train my brain not to think of it this way, it is so easy to slip into this duality of like, this is physical and
Yep.
this is
Totally.
spiritual, this is intellectual, this is emotional, this is my public life, this is my private life, this
Yes.
is spiritual, this is secular,
Yeah, I mean, the boundaries, for me, the boundaries have sort of broken down over time. And so, I just think, all life is spiritual and all life is physical. So it's at the same time.
Yep.
Maybe it's paradoxical that way, but, I just kind of think of it that way. And, the other help for me is I joined Al-Anon about 8 years ago, so I go to 3 groups a week, and it's been very helpful for me on the personal side, but also on the social side.
Yeah.
To get some boundaries, to understand, my addiction propensities, and, kind of curb those a little bit more. So
Yeah.
I was at a meeting this morning, and it's a meditation meeting, and it starts with 20 minutes of meditation, and then we have our regular meeting, 12-step meeting.
Well, Terry, I want to turn it over to the room, but
Sure.
I do recognize you've got a book here with you, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you want to talk about it before we go to the
Not
recording
necessarily.
questions.
I just brought it, and I really meant to bring a copy for you because I really valued our growing relationship.
Thank you.
And I couldn't find the box where the extra copies are, so it's packed away somewhere. Because I now have my grandchildren and great-grandson living with me, so I've got a little less room. So
Well, I'll certainly see you around.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please.
So, folks, do you have anything that's on your heart or on your minds, about showing up in our world, and the intersection with spirituality, or your, internal life, social life, any of that? Any questions? Okay. Nick, we'll have the mic come over to you.
Hi there. So this has actually been something that's been going through my mind a lot lately, and I'm a parent to 2 young children. And something as an elder millennial is we've got a lot of pie slices of humble pie throughout the years of our lives, and a lot of self-reflection and seeing internally how we can be better as parents. And with the things that have been happening through this week, my daughter had a conversation with me about how some of her friends are afraid at school, or she's afraid, and she's turning 7. And the best answer I had at that time, and maybe you have a better one, is that we have to meet people where they're at, and help them how we can. So I guess my question is how do you consider this as a parenting aspect, when you're working with younger kids and trying to get them to understand it while you're trying to decompress and understand it yourself?
That's a good question.
Yeah, thank you for that. And a couple of the people that I work with are young parents. So I have to learn what it's like because, again, I'm not actively raising children, but now I have a 22-year-old granddaughter who has a 5-month-old baby, and I have a 15-year-old grandson. So, but I'm not their parent. I'm their grandfather, and so I'm mindful of that. I think one thing that's helpful is, it's just very helpful that you're listening to your 7-year-old daughter, and that she's able to feel that relationship that she can share with you. I've tried to gently ritualize our dinner meal, especially during this last season of Advent. So we lit a candle, we had an Advent calendar that we opened with a brief scripture, and then I offered to read the Chronicles of Narnia at the table. And so we've been working on that, and they seem to like it. I mean, it's different than looking at their phones. So, it's kind of hard for them at some point. But now my grandson, who's 15, said, Morfar, they call me Morfar, which is Norwegian for mother's father. So, Morfar, could I read too? And he said, sure. So now he's starting to read from the Chronicles, and I think that it may be a rotating thing after a while. So some kind of ritual, family ritual. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So I'm left with some things that I'm going to be chewing on after I reflect on this conversation later today. I want to hold that, like, all of those things that I mentioned at the beginning of this service, those are very real. And I think they are a burden. They're a lot to carry. A number of folks in this room, as I've gotten to know you, I've learned that you started coming here for community. And I want to share how important it is, how necessary it is for me and my spiritual health to have that community, but also to be with you. Like, you are my spiritual community, and it means so much to me. It helps keep me going when I'm scared, when I'm sad, when I'm angry. I also want to share how appreciative I am for those times that some of you have corrected me.
Rebuked, maybe?
Maybe rebuked. So yeah. I mentioned up front when I was like early here, it might have been my second or third week. I said, hey, if I'm living out of discordance with justice, that I'm speaking here from the front and living differently. And Clay Osborne came up to me afterwards, who you met, and he goes, I took out your trash and I noticed how much fast food you've got in there.
Ooh.
And that's terrible for the environment. And I'm like, you're right.
Yes.
Yep. Fair.
Yeah.
But also the joy and the laughter that we get to share too, how meaningful that is. The dinners, the foods, the cookies, the coffee, all of it. All of it. I appreciate you all so much. We'll continue to move forward on the work that's ahead for us, showing up for one another, showing up for our broader community. And if you ever reach that point of you're like, I do feel kind of all by my lonesome on this, please feel free to reach out, okay? I might not pick up right away, like if I'm having dinner with my spouse.
Better have that boundary, yes. But well, I think the analogy of the family dinner or the family ritual is also true for the congregation, and to have a place where you as the pastor and the congregation can be together and sharing concerns. And the place that happened at Redeemer was an annual retreat that used to be a council retreat or a session retreat. And then we opened it up and we called it a leader retreat, and finally we just called it a retreat. And it was mostly relational meetings and reflection and time together, play games and laugh and be with each other. And we did a whole weekend, which is hard for people, young families and stuff. So it was hard for me. But making space for relationships and reflection in the congregational life somehow.
Yeah. Love that. All right, Terry, thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
We appreciate you being here.
Sure.